change coming this spring for people who want to improve DEI in their departments.
Yeah, it's definitely something, especially in light of the team up report that came up a few years ago, became more of an explicit focus for the department. So yeah, there could be some, broad interest, and people could readily jump on board and see the benefit. So that'd be cool.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later. And because we're at 5 past the hour, I want to get started with our webinar today with some folks from RIT. Mike Verostek and Ben Zwickl will be talking about graduate student research group things, and I'll let them take it away. And
Yeah,
please use the
thanks.
Q&A, by the way, if you have questions. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Alexis. And yeah, like Alexis said, I'm Mike Verostek. I'm a grad student at the Rochester Institute of Technology and the University of Rochester. I have affiliations with both. This project was funded through the NSF and the Inclusive Graduate Education Network. Thanks for dropping by. Ben, is there anything you want to introduce
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm at RIT, and Mike and I have been working together for almost 5 years now. And this project that you're looking at here is kind of the last 2 years of his work. It's a portion of that, and so Mike's going to do most of the talking, but I'll probably cut in here and there with either Q&A questions, or maybe if we get some audience feedback, just kind of use that to start up a little discussion. So, Mike, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, yep. And like Ben mentioned earlier, the QR code at the bottom, or the website, we're going to use a couple times for polls about graduate education throughout the presentation, but there'll be like many opportunities to scan the code. So, all right, so yeah, let's get going. So an ongoing problem in physics PhD programs that's like really commonly cited in the literature is dropping out, leaving. Attrition rates in physics doctoral programs are estimated to be around 40 to 50%. And that's a big deal because it affects students who, when they leave, that's can be emotionally distressing and feelings of failure, but it affects departments too, right? They have to invest into recruiting new students, and the students that they did have in the first place don't get to produce research for the department. This disproportionately affects traditionally underrepresented students in physics, though, so it's extra important to look at the underlying reasons for why leaving in physics is so high. And the other aspect of this is that most often students leave within the first 2 years. So we're really interested in looking at the processes that are sort of happening around that time, because that's the time that students are most likely to leave their physics programs. Something that's already known is that advisors play a really critical role in whether students decide to stay or leave. Negative advising relationships are known to motivate students to leave, and students know that advising relationships are really important, right? A couple quotes from students in our data. If Gabriella saying, before I started applying to graduate programs, all I heard was the relationship with your PI is going to make or break your career. People recognize that it's like a really big commitment. You've got another student saying, I had weird feelings thinking that my advisor would be like in charge of my life for the next 5 years. So what we're interested in specifically is students seeking their research group, how they actually find it, right? So a lot of existing research exists on, if you've got a relationship that already exists, and a mentoring relationship that already exists, what are the characteristics that make it like good or not? A lot less is focused on how those partnerships form in the first place. And like we said, the first year in graduate school is one of the top areas where attrition happens, and it's also really hard to navigate the first year of graduate school, and you're trying to find your advisor in the first year of graduate school. So it's really not clear that if students are having a hard time navigating, that they're able to sort of get into the advising relationships that they want in the first place. So that's been the subject of our work. So before we get going into what we actually did, we're going to start hopefully with a poll. Hopefully we'll get some good feedback here. So the first question, I'll pause here for 1 second, so you can hop onto the link if you need to. But the first question is essentially going to be, by what time in students' graduate careers do you think they should join a research group, right? So when should students join a research group? Not necessarily when they actually do, but like when should they? First question. All right, we got a couple responses. Amazing. Oh, 4 responses. This is exciting. I don't know how many to expect, so I think 4 might be the number. I'll give it like 1 more second.
Yeah, it's probably about 4, I think.
4 seems pretty good. All right, let's see. Go 1 forward. There we go. All right, so some folks are saying like before they start their programs, second semester, first year summer. Yeah, okay. Yeah, first year summer, second semester, I think are pretty typical. We'll talk about some of the expectations laid out in like graduate handbooks. Before they start their programs, maybe seems earlier than the other 2, but we're going to see that it's really variable, right, when this happens. So the follow-up question to like when students should join their research lab is the question of I have to move forward with the arrow keys to move these forward. The follow-up question to this is when do you think students actually join a research group? Like when do they actually do it? And this one's free response, so you can type anything you want in here, words. It's weird that I have to go forward with the arrow keys, but yeah, okay, so we got a few, right? So first year sometime, second year, first semester. So first semester, no idea. Right? Yeah. Good question. Good responses. Right. So first semester way different than like second year, right? Because first semester, you're thinking like a lot of the legwork for looking into a group had to happen sort of before you got there almost. So you can go in and sort of start thinking about a group. Second year would mean you spent, a lot of time in graduate school before actually joining. Yeah, super interesting. And the last question in the sort of initial polls here, sort of to what extent do you agree or disagree with the statement that incoming physics PhD students know exactly what research they want to join when they get there? So like when they get there, do you think their interests are like really well developed, they know exactly what they want to do, or do you feel like not so much?
So this is not should they know, but just do they actually
Do
have
they?
really
Yeah.
formed? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And then there's the last one, then we'll get into some results. Oh, we got 5 responses that time. All right, what do we got? Okay, so a bit of a spread, right? So some agree, some disagree, a little in the middle, yeah. So the neither agree nor disagree, maybe that's indicating that maybe some do, some don't. Agree, maybe folks usually have a decent idea. Yeah, interesting. So we're going to talk about all of this, right? We have data on people's interests and sort of when people join. So we're going to talk about all these results. So thanks for participating in the intro polls. There will be several more as the results get going. So those questions get to sort of our general kind of guiding questions for our study, which are basically when do students join research groups? Why do they join research groups the way they do, and when that happens? And what are the consequences of when people join research groups and the events that lead them to join research groups? So our study has been investigating physics PhD students joining research groups. I'm going to talk first a little about how we actually did that, and then I'll get into some results. So we interviewed 40 physics PhD students from across the country. It was a really diverse sample. We had 16 male students, 24 non-male students, 13 institutions represented across that sample. A lot of those were pretty high research, but it was a mix of public and private, a couple sort of less research intensive. Our our interview protocol, we first sort of gather a timeline of steps that people took in their search. So I basically asked, what was the sort of the first thing you did on your path to finding a group? So students laid out a set of steps. Usually they were sort of broad, like I applied to grad school, I went to visiting weekend, things like that. But then at each step, I'd ask, what were major questions or concerns that you had during that point in time. So people talk about all sorts of things here, things more specific, like our students in the group publishing, or concerns that were just like, I can't tell what research people are doing. Like that's been hard for me to figure out. And it's all contextualized because it's contextualized within the step. We know when those sort of questions and concerns are happening for each student. Um, and then for each of those questions, concerns, we went back through and said, what were the sort of things that helped and what got in your way of figuring those things out? So if it was something like our students in the group publishing, someone might have said like, what really helped was I actually got to talk to a graduate student in the group, but maybe like something that got in the way was, well, I tried to go on the website and figure it out, but like the website hadn't been updated in 20 years. So, I couldn't tell if anyone had been publishing recently. So that was the interview. So we got a lot of rich data out of this. And first, I'm actually going to go through a sort of case study of two students' interviews. I'm going to show you these really contrasting stories of two students who were trying to find an advisor. This has actually resulted in a conference paper, and I'll give you the link to that at the end. I didn't want to give it to you like in the midst of this because we've got the poll going on. So Alec and Brianna were two students in our data. Alex described his whole PhD finding a group process as, things worked really well, right? He got exactly what he wanted. Brianna described it more as like the process for me was pretty rough. Alex was a first-year grad student when we did the interview. He identified as male and Hispanic. He went to like an elite private undergrad, big R1 PhD program, and one of his parents actually had a PhD in STEM. Brianna was a second year by the time she interviewed with me. She identified as female and Black. She went to a large public undergrad and a large R1 public PhD program. And she was a first-gen student. She was the first in her family to go to grad school. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up their timelines, right? So like I said, in the interviews, we had sort of our data was contextualized in time. So we can look at, say, when they actually joined their research group. So one big difference in these two timelines is that Alex got into his group before he got to grad school, so in his senior summer. He was actually choosing between two research labs, and he started to do research over the summer. Brianna didn't get to join her lab until the second year. She joined a professor's group, even though it wasn't really the research that she kind of wanted. It's kind of the result of several other events that I'll talk about now. But let's focus on Alex first. So Alex, in his junior summer, he did an RU at like his top choice grad school, right? He was meeting with potential advisors. He said, I got advice about applying to places from his undergraduate advisor. Be persistent, make connections, network, do what you can. So basically, when he got to the RU, he was making all these connections that he needed to make. He said he met with the chair of the physics department while he was there. He was like, I really want to come here. Can I get advice on applying? And he said, once you get your foot in the door with I'm an RU student, the door is kind of open for you. I did an RU. I would not necessarily have had the gumption to go to the chair's office and talk about things like that. But his senior year, he sort of started the whole formal application process. But again, since he already had those connections, he was able to start meeting with potential advisors again. He organized lab tours. All the questions about culture and stuff like that were answered when he met with grad students. He went on these 2.5, 3 hour long tours. They told him more about the culture than any email exchange, any interactions with professors, right? So he said, when my application gets in, by that time the chair knows his name, the PIs know his name. He gets selected in the first round of review. He's relaxed, and he says they want me to work for them, right? He feels like they want him. So that's sort of Alex's story, right? In a nutshell, he kind of knew how to play the game. He got the connections. He got to where he wanted to be very quickly. Brianna's story is a little different. So she had gone to graduate school. whereas Alex's was very research driven. She went to graduate school mostly based on proximity to family, which is also really important for some students, but it's just a different set of priorities, right? She had a broad idea that she'd probably want to do astrophysics, but nothing super specific. So her interests were also very different. Alex's interests were very focused, hers were not so much. She didn't really describe approaching any faculty or thinking about her advisor search really until May, right? Until May of her first year. So she went most of her first year not really thinking about this. Which he said was partly because the department didn't really like place an emphasis on finding a research advisor. She figured it was all okay. So she said, a lot of people in my program also went to the undergrad here, and she was confused because she came into grad school. She said she didn't know anything about graduate school. I'm the first in my family to go to graduate school. I had no idea what I was doing. And so she saw everyone else kind of had advisors, and she was kind of freaking out. And she's like, they just got here. What's going on, right? Because she didn't have an advisor, but they did. So um, all of a sudden, she got an email from her department advisor that basically told her she needed to get into a group really quickly because the first year was ending. So the first year summer, she joined into her group, but ended up leaving by the end of the summer. She approached some more faculty, but none of them had funding. She said, I had joined one group. I tried it for a little bit and realized that it wasn't what she wanted to do. She didn't really have any choice in what she was working for. She felt like she asked the professor if she could work on something different. He said no. So she wasn't happy there. None of the other faculty had funding. So she was starting to feel like all of a sudden she doesn't really have like a home in the department, right? She said, I thought I was cursed. I had slighted the department in some way, thinking I'd offended someone. I was being blacklisted from research advisors. It didn't make any sense. And she said, I'm really just having a hard time because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do now if I can't stay in the program. So she was thinking that she might even have to leave, right? Second year, though, she eventually got in touch with actually her former electromagnetism professor. So she already kind of had a connection there and said, like, do you have any room in your research group, even though it wasn't quite the research she wanted to do? And he was like, yeah, we'll be able to find something for you. You might have to TA, but we'll figure something out. So why he was able to do that, maybe using TA funding, but other professors couldn't, is unclear. But one other comment that she made once she did get into a research group was that it was still hard to like adjust to that, research and coursework lifestyle. She said, I don't know how to balance everything, what's expected of me, how fast I need to do research, if I need to produce stuff. It's hard to self-manage research on top of schoolwork and everything. So their stories are really different in a lot of ways, right? Just temporally where things are laying on the timeline, but also sort of how they navigated through graduate school. Alex, actually, despite all of his networking, recognized that a lot of time his impression was that like the schools left students to fend for themselves, right? You figure it out. We'll help if you ask, but we're not going to set up structures to efficiently like set you up with labs and students. And obviously Brown felt the same way, right? None of the grad students know what they're doing. They're just confused and broke was one of her overarching sentiment, right? So actually both of them thought the grad school was pretty unstructured, but Alex seemed to have the tools to navigate it better. He talked about how you get this perfect line from I'm an undergrad to I'm a grad student joining a group where he sort of found someone in a key position that helped him at every step of the way. Whereas Brown, I kind of felt like I thought I'd get some more advising help, but in reality, I just had to figure it out on my own. So this actually is a good time to pause because I see a thing in the chat. So, oh, Alexis just saying if you have questions, use Q&A. Yes, I agree. But in the meantime, time for another poll. So if you happen to have your phone open, here's another one. So first off, do either of those stories, either Alex or Brianna, resonate with you regarding any students you've interacted with in your, you know, trials in graduate school or mentoring undergrads or anything? We got a couple of responses. I'll go. Ooh, amazing. 4 responses. Yeah, so yeah, so you probably see elements of those, right? Because I think regardless, all of us have a little bit of those, each of those stories in us, where sometimes you feel like you get connections to get where you want to go, but other times you feel a little you're struggling to navigate things. More broadly, though, what kind of problems do you identify in either of their narratives regarding graduate school in general, or particular things that they experience? Just any kind of broad observations that you have. This one's free response too, so you can just put whatever you want in and it'll pop up. Or any thoughts that come to mind, really. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, how are you supposed to figure it out? Why don't the schools sort of help with the process, need for more support, right? Yeah, those are excellent questions. And a big theme that we're going to discuss in a minute is that sort of need for more support. That's sort of I think the underlying theme of a lot of the stuff we've worked on. One in there that is really interesting, though, is the impact of the REU, right? Is that a lot of things we found were can be traced back to sort of people's experiences in undergraduate, and whether they had access to sort of those research experiences and the connections they made during those, and how those shaped people's interests. Yeah, the REUs had such a big impact. Yeah, so that's all awesome. Um, so don't go too far, because that's gonna pop up in like one more second. But before that, so the reason I shared those first is that those case studies are emblematic of a lot of broader themes across our interviews. Um, One is that finding a group we found really impacts sense of belonging, right? So you had Brianna, who was kind of saying, like, I thought I was cursed, right? Thinking she might have to leave. She didn't feel like she had a home in the department, versus Alex saying, like, they want me to work for them. Like, my advisor wants me there. And we're going to see that play out for some other students too. Two is the sort of coursework and research being in tension. So coursework is one of the most structured aspects of graduate school in the first year, whereas, as some of you pointed out in the comments, the search for a group sort of wasn't, right? So Brianna had this hard time deciding, like, am I supposed to emphasize the coursework? Because that's like obviously important, because I need to pass that. But then there's like the research is kind of what I'm here for. So there was a sort of tension there. Alex didn't really have to deal with that because he was already in a group before he got there, right? Um, Three, like folks pointed out, students kind of right need more structure. Um, the Alex even said that they kind of leave the students defend for themselves, but Alex kind of had some of the tools to deal with it. Um, And lastly, is that students join at different times, right? And there are consequences to that. Being able to start research sooner and things. And so we're going to discuss that a little more too, but broader across our entire sample, not just Alex and Brianna. Um, okay, so like I said, no, another right back to the poll. Um, this one also free response, I believe. So what factors do you think lead graduate students to feel like they don't belong, right? And that could be anything in the whole graduate experience, not necessarily limited to advisors or. Yeah. This is amazing. This is so cool. I'm so happy with all of the responses. Yeah. So okay, so a few really interesting ones in here, right? Some, the difficult lab members, hostile culture. Yeah, those are definitely having to do with the sort of, being in a place where there's uh just not the right level of support, right? So that can definitely drive people out, or unsupportive advisor too. Um those are more like you're sort of in the lab already, which is totally true, and we definitely see that in our data. But some of the other ones in here are like seeing peers do better than them, people receiving more support. That's during the process, right? When you're looking around and you're like, man, these other people have advisors already or are doing well in classes, like I'm not. So you kind of get that imposter syndrome, feeling alone sort of deal, definitely. Yeah, right. If that's a really good one, right? Because of grades, you know. So if the coursework is telling you like, man, you're not fit to be here, uh, but who knows? Maybe you're a good researcher. I don't, who knows? And we're going to talk about that tension later too, with some questions about coursework. So this is all amazing. These are amazing poll responses. I'm glad we've done this. Um, Okay, so number one, big major takeaway from some of our work is that being in a research group drove a sense of belonging. Another case, so Brianna demonstrated that. Another student we interviewed was named Nathan. That's all pseudonyms, but Nathan. Nathan had joined a group fairly early in his first year, sort of probably around winter break.
Oh, Mike, I'm
He
not
wasn't.
seeing the slide right now. Did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Is it maybe unscreen share and screen share again?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because the screen share is loading now.
Yeah, it seemed like it kind of froze on the poll EV question. At least that's what I was seeing on my end.
Oh,
That's what I was
interesting.
seeing as well.
Oh, that's too bad. Hang on, let me stop the share one more time and go back to.
You can always try to pop out of presentation mode and pop back in, and maybe that'll.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
There we go.
All right, you see that?
Yep.
Back. All right,
Yep.
amazing.
Back to normal.
As we were saying, being in a research group drives sense of belonging. So we had a student named Nathan, right? Not real name, but Nathan. He had joined a group sort of early in his first year. He was a straight A student in undergrad. So when he got to graduate school and courses weren't going so well, that was kind of like he wasn't sure what to make of that. And he was also feeling kind of isolated in his department overall. So he had told me last semester was a whole mess, especially with one of the classes, Stat Mac, that he was like, it wasn't exciting me. And another class, a professor just taught it really horribly. So he started to think like, is this a me and physics thing? Like maybe I was wrong that I didn't actually like physics. So the classes are sort of making him question this. Um, and then he had expressed to advisor, I might not stay for the whole program. I might master out. And he had talked about that for a while. So Nathan was also thinking about leaving. And it was primarily the coursework that was driving that. Um, his research group though was the thing that kept him in graduate school. Because he said doing research, that stuff, that felt really good and independent. I'm still interested in physics. There's still lots to do. And he said that whole portion he's still really excited about. And he says, my advisor wants me to stay in the group, keep doing the work, which he said was really nice to hear. So the research group was the thing that was sort of giving him that sense of belonging. Like, yeah, I'm able to do this. I'm gonna be able to succeed here. Um, and like I said, the flip side of that was that the coursework wasn't really supporting his belonging there. In fact, students more often cited coursework as a hindrance to finding a group and actually starting research. A lot of students felt like that's the reason they were there, and then coursework was just sort of this barrier to that. Um, so, especially for students who were sort of still looking for a group during that first year when they were trying to do classes, right? So Deb was saying it's really stressful because I can't devote a lot of time to looking for a group. I have courses, I have a TA position. So in the back of my head, I always feel like I should have done this today, but throughout the day, there was no way I could have, right? And you said that's stressful. Another student, Selena, said, she actually was in a research group, but she was feeling like I wasn't sure what my expected output would be. So this is kind of like Brianna, right? I wasn't sure what my output would be with research versus classes, because some advisors say classes don't matter. So students are getting these mixed signals from advisors that are like classes don't matter, but it's also one of the more fundamental structures of the first year of graduate school. Um, and lastly, Isaac kind of bluntly pointed out that he friends would ask him, have you found a research group? And he'd be like, no, I haven't thought about that. I'm too busy trying to find the electric field of a charged hemisphere, which kind of like emphasizes the tension between one of those is kind of like a life-changing decision, and the other seems menial when you put it like that. Um, so I think last poll, second to last poll, I lied. This one's word cloud though, so that'll be fun. What is the purpose of graduate coursework? What are people's thoughts there? So word cloud means you sort of enter just like a couple words that sort of describe the stuff that you think about if I were to say the purpose of graduate coursework, oh yeah, if you needed content, teaching, weeding out knowledge, yeah. Screening. Yeah, so it seems like there's sort of two themes coming out here. One is like sort of knowledge, screening, tradition. Yeah, tradition's a big one. The screening and the weeding definitely is uh the idea of kind of funneling down the class. But the other thing that's in here is sort of knowledge, content, prep, stuff like that. So it's sort of like there's like maybe like fundamental knowledge that's needed, and also it's like kind of a mechanism to weed some people out, and tradition gets kind of lumped in there too. There's one that says research, but I'm not sure which one that's attached to. So maybe the next question will shed some light on that, which is how much you feel like you agree with the statement graduate coursework prepares students to do research. Okay, well then. So that's general agreement, right? So that's really interesting, right? I mean, it seems like there's a fair bit of agreement that the graduate coursework doesn't necessarily align that well with research, but it's actually like one of the first barriers that people get to in graduate school to prove that they're sort of able to do it, even though it's only like a very small chunk of this overall big experience, right? Um, So is that the last question in this poll? Yes, it is. Okay. So moving on, hopefully it doesn't lock up on the screen again. Can you still see it?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, beautiful. So the third theme that we had sort of put on the slide a few minutes ago was that students need more structure, right? So that was another thing that came out of Alex and Brianna's stories, and that we also saw throughout our data, right? So this lack of guidelines and expectations led a lot of students to difficulties in their group search process. Some examples of just some of the ways people described their first year of graduate school. There's no guidelines. The department hasn't done a good job at facilitating ways to learn about groups here. Once you get here, you kind of have to fend for yourself. That's not Alex saying fend for yourself again. That's another student saying fend for yourself again. Like I was a little confused about like what my role was supposed to be in looking for groups. Is that something that comes to me, or is that something I go to them, or what happens? Right. So there's some general kind of confusion going on there. And this is particularly important because we already saw that when people experience those difficulties in the search, that can reduce your sense of belonging, right? So if you don't have the structure and you're sort of struggling to figure out where you're going to go, and you see other people maybe succeeding in it, you are sort of feeling more isolated. It's particularly bad because this also really systematically disadvantages students who don't know quite like how to play the game. Like Alex and Brianna's case is really illustrated with some students that come in and they sort of know the answers to the questions like where do I have to go, who do I have to talk to. That's sort of that hidden curriculum thing, right? That people who don't know that as much about graduate school maybe just aren't able to do as well. So that's where a lack of structure really systematically disadvantages folks who don't know how to play the game as well. One really interesting example of this that segues into our last point is what do graduate handbooks say about like joining groups? Like when do graduate handbooks tell you to join groups? So this is a separate sort of analysis we did on the side, where we looked at, PhD program requirements for the schools that the students that we interviewed came from. And we went and we looked to see when they suggested that students get into groups. One had a formal requirement. It said, I think it was the first semester after you pass your written qualifying exam. You have to have a group and you have to have a formal agreement with your advisor. 6 were more like typical timelines. So, and that was squishy. So some people said, you know, it's really typical for people to have an advisor by their spring semester of their first year. Others said more typical could be like to formally join a group would be like third year. So one had sort of like a whole slot of time coded between like green, yellow, and red. Like, you know, how is this supposed to uh, uh, aligned with your schedule? 5 didn't mention it, right? So the entire program handbooks for 5 of these schools were structured entirely around qualifying exams and passing those. Um, you need an advisor for some of those things, but it was kind of implicit in the whole thing. So if you're a student who is sort of looking for what's the requirement here, for some of those, there is none. So it's really unclear. And I think it shows in our data when we look at when students actually join research groups. So students join at really different times. So this goes back to the very first poll question we had asked. Students in our data, about half of people found groups, had joined a group first semester or before, right? So almost before they had gotten to graduate school or just after joining, they were in a research group. The other half had joined later. But this has consequences, right? Because the time to join impacts things like your time to completion. If you get into a group a year earlier than someone else, maybe you can take your qualifying exam earlier. Maybe you can start to do research earlier. It impacts funding availability, right? Brianna had gone to 4 professors who told her that they didn't have funding. But if you're in sooner, I mean, maybe in that limited pool of spots, you just happen to ask earlier than someone else. Uh, and also it impacts that anxiety over the search. It's related to that seeing other people, you know, succeeding, whereas you feel like you're not. And we have some data to back these things up, right? So, for instance, Heather was a student. She had joined a group first semester, and she was trying to take her qualifying exam, which was formatted as like you need an advisor to give a sort of a research proposal. So she needed an advisor for that. And the reason she wanted to do it was because she needed to pass her qualifying exam to get to apply for some funding. She said, you know, if I hadn't been in my group as a first year and kind of set on that path, I don't think I would have had the knowledge or the resources to be ready to take my qualifying exam that early, right? She couldn't have done it. So getting in the group sooner helped Heather with time to completion. I mean, she got to do her qualifying exam faster and getting maybe some external funding. Luis said, you know, he was just so relieved that the whole first year he didn't have to go around and look for groups as actively as everyone else. Whereas other people in his cohort were still searching for an advisor. He didn't. He was there. He joined his first semester, and so he didn't have to worry about it. So that was a major load off of his mind. So less anxiety, right? And we see the opposite for other folks, right? So Dev, who we had a quote from earlier about sort of struggling to find an advisor, said it's a bit stressful for some of the people before even coming here. They were fixed on an advisor. Everything was fixed, and so like talking to them, his graduate peers, wasn't really helpful because they're not going through any of this. Him trying to find an advisor, and as we've pointed out, Eric points out, it seems like having some structure in place would, you know, be really helpful to, if not work with groups, at least visit them and see what it looks like to work in that group, right? So if there's one theme to sort of take away from all of this is really the lack of structure is harmful, right? So lastly, we just want to really quickly go over some of the things that we had talked about for maybe changes to promote some of the retention and satisfaction that students have for physics graduate education. All of these are sort of suggestions from our first paper, which I'll have a link to in at the end. These all, need research and seeing what's most effective, but at least I think is a starting point for ideas for adding structure to the first year of physics graduate education. The first sort of broad area that we had looked at was sort of more structured ways to foster connections between research groups and students, right? Things that the department can do from the department perspective, just hosting social events, promoting graduate students getting together, right, to share some of that hidden curriculum knowledge, the norms, right, to get incoming graduate students connected with older graduate students. Some days maybe taken out of the curriculum to say, like, this is a day that's totally dedicated, no classes, toward touring labs, meeting advisors, department facilitated, to really build in that this is an important aspect of the first year. Things that should be supported by the department, but maybe led by graduate students, because senior graduate students have a really important role to play in this and transferring knowledge to incoming graduate students about the norms and the culture of the department. The department should be supporting like a peer mentorship program, right? New grad students can come in and have a peer mentor to talk to. Supporting sort of maybe like some kind of within department conference or something that new grad students can go around and see what kind of research older graduate students are doing. On the other side, we thought a lot about sort of more formal structures to put in place regarding like coursework and how to structure the first year. One thing that we had thought about was maybe a way to implement STEM sort of individual development plans. Are essentially like trajectories for students. It's something they fill out and it gives them a sort of roadmap to their goals throughout graduate school. And on that would be, what do I have to do to get to the end goal of graduating with a PhD and getting into the career I want to do. And one major milestone on that route is getting an advisor. So at least if it were sort of integrated in student advising, really play up the importance of getting an advisor and finding a research group. One thing that people, no one in the data really mentioned coursework as being like particularly helpful, unless it was an elective, like something that was very tightly tied to modern research, because they felt like it gave them at least a taste of what research would be like. So thinking about ways to integrate topical research into the curriculum, right? And last, thinking about ways to maybe spread course requirements over a longer time period, right? Especially in light of a lot of places getting rid of a formal qualifying exam, which typically you had to take the courses in the first year to prep you for a qualifying exam. But if you get rid of the qualifying exam, maybe you can spread the courses out a little more and just free up time for people to go and think about these sorts of things. Looking for labs, going to group meetings, starting to do research. And lastly, maybe even formally integrating like advisor search into the curriculum, like maybe a 1 credit like research exploration, maybe pick some advisors that you want to go tour their labs, and this is part of the course, you go do it. A lot of places, this gets to the next slide, already have a sort of built-in research seminar course, but I think our data has kind of shown that that's not enough, right? Research seminars where students just kind of go and listen to a professor talk about their research, it kind of lacks connection to the physical lab space, to the people, to what the research is really all about. And it doesn't always align with student interests. If you're a theorist and most of the research seminars are about experiment or vice versa, you're automatically not so much interested in a lot of that content. So, and that's not to say you shouldn't be exposed to new research, but it gives you some motivation maybe to not pay as much attention. And research seminars just can't, a PowerPoint can't give you as much insight into the day-to-day life and group culture. Like Alex had said in his story, that it was meeting with the grad students, being in the lab. Those were the things that gave him insight into the culture and what it would actually be like to work in a group. And that's just as important as the research, right? And lastly, we sort of leave you with A final thought of what about even more structure, like way more structure? Other disciplines, biology, medicine, do like formal lab rotations where you have to go through and try out different labs before you choose. Physics doesn't really do that. Could something similar be done in physics? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but what about major overhauls to the way we think about matching students with advisors and research groups? Um, what could that look like? What would fit the disciplinary norms and values of physics? Um, so that's it for me, I believe. I'll leave it on the last slide with links to our conference paper. That is all about Alex and Brianna, so it has more details about their stories. And then there's a draft of our paper in the archive about student perspectives, finding a group, and we should have more work forthcoming in the near future too. So that's it for me. Ben, is there anything you want to add?
No, not at this time. Yeah, just be happy to open it up for any questions that come at the end here.
Yes, thank you so much. I have a lot of questions if no one else does, because during one period of my life, I was very interested in grad ed. I still am, and I was doing more things with it. So, and that was like a decade ago. So so I was just thinking about some of that while you were speaking. One of the things I found really interesting was about how stu about you talking about like the working relationship and the culture of the group. Is that a trend that you've noticed around students that they're actively looking into this, or are they more focused on like the research area, like what's exciting and things like that?
So that's an amazing question, and is actually a big part of the stuff we're working on now. A lot of students actually are really invested in finding a group with a good culture. Um, Most of the time they talk about it as like the second thing, like because when you're outside of graduate school coming in, what's easiest to access is things like websites and at things that give you insight more into research and not culture stuff. So that's sort of like a first pass. But then once people get there, the culture becomes a more important factor. Um, the caveats to that, I think, are folks who there are definitely some folks that we're going to talk about who definitely kind of go into graduate school thinking like the research is the only thing that matters, and that can work out or it might not, right? And we have some cases where it doesn't work out, and that's sort of an avenue for leaving, for not being content. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that was a trend I had noticed, was that some people were very focused on their research, even though it was clear their working relationship for whatever reasons wasn't working out with their advisor or their research group. And so that was my other question is how does your work delve into people who switch research groups? Because I've known quite a few people who switch multiple times and that extends the timeline and whatnot.
Yes, yeah. So of the 22 people in our group in our sample that had joined a group in sort of second semester or later, those of that subset of seven had switched groups at some point already. It's almost half. So a lot of people in our sample had switched groups. Um, and it definitely depends. It's interesting, right? So it depends sort of on the reason for switching, sort of sometimes and also when people joined initially, when sort of what impact it has. So we had a couple of students who came in sort of saying like, this is the research I want to do. And they got into a group really soon. And ended up not liking the research. So it was like, all right, well, I'll just change. And they had time to do it, right?
So it almost acts like a
Whereas,
rotation program for them. They got into a lab so early, they try it, and then they try something else. It's like having a rotation, but kind of informally. So
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, because I know some people who had hung really tightly onto the research group, even though it wasn't working. And then once they switched research groups, they were collecting a lot of data, publishing got out very quickly. I'm just wondering, how do we foster sort of, I don't want to call it failure, but that switching groups and whatnot, besides rotations, I think would be an excellent way.
yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, that was an entire in some future research we're definitely going to talk about. We had a category of data that was sort of called like the stickiness of groups that people feel like once they're in it, they feel kind of obligated to stick with it a lot of times, and so it's hard to sort of break away from it.
Yeah, because if
Yeah.
there's no stated rules about joining a lab, there's even fewer stated rules about how to switch one. And so, yeah, I think a lot of students just really were not even sure like what was appropriate, how to navigate that decision, it seemed like from the data.
Well,
That
one
makes
thing, oops, yeah, no, one thing that, two things I'd say that people did cite as helpful in those thinking about that. One was clear expectations from whatever group they were in. If their advisor was like telling them, yeah, it's totally normal if you like come in and don't like it, like you can leave. If that's clearly stated, it was helpful for them. They said I didn't feel as stuck. Or another thing was other graduate students in the program telling them that it was sort of normal. Like so things that were normalizing it were beneficial as opposed to, but that those were all dependent on someone actually, stating it, right?
got it. And I noticed, which was I was writing things about this when then you started discussing it, is about the grads handbooks and the policies and whatnot. How are those introduced to the students? Or are there good ways that people do this stuff? Because I find a lot of grad students I mentored, first they might not know there is a handbook, and then we don't know where to get the handbook.
Yeah, I mean, so that was something we had done kind of on the side. It wasn't something that like a lot of students brought up, certainly about like that their graduate handbook was ambiguous. So the
It
fact that
was
they didn't,
inspired by a reviewer comment, right? The
yeah,
reviewer comment
actually,
was like,
yep,
what did the students didn't say it much, so we didn't write about it. And then a reviewer came back with that. Yeah.
right. So a couple students did actually amongst the students who discussed like formal graduate handbook requirements actually were most commonly the international students in our sample. Um, were most likely to say something about like, it's really ambiguous in the program manual how like funding works or something like that. Um, so maybe there's something there also because if if students in the US are feeling sort of unattached from like being able to contact programs, like I'd imagine it's even more difficult. So you'd have to rely on more online resources and things. Um,
On it, and sort of a last question, we might have time. I don't see any questions in the chat, which is fine. So when you were talking about the importance of research experiences and things like that for grad students, I was wondering, has anybody tried to make like a course, how they have those cures, the course-based undergraduate research experiences, but they are for undergrads, hence the name. Do people do that yet for grad students? Because I feel like that would be really ripe for that.
I mean, quick thought is
Ben?
that even laboratory courses are incredibly rare at the graduate level. Like, I mean, the curriculum is almost entirely theory. And so, yeah, kind of a research-based experience. Yeah, I don't know. And it would actually be interesting if it would fill the same niche, because I think like the cures a lot of times are trying to make students feel a part of a larger discipline. So like I'm a freshman or sophomore in a particular discipline, and I get to do this kind of large course-based undergraduate research experience. I feel like I've maybe done some astronomy or done some, real biology research, used some instrumentation, but you would totally lack that connection to like, say, the other graduate students in the lab or to the faculty PI. And so I think that's where, maybe it would not be as appropriate, because I think that the relationships you need to foster are really with the group of people that will be kind of your most intimate collaborators over the next few years. And so, yeah, I mean, so and that's why I think, in the suggestions that were laid in the talk, they focused more on getting people into labs, whether that's like a rotation day, or a rotation semester, or just some opportunity to like an open house, like a graduate student research seminar thing, like really building the connections and getting people into the spaces where they can see what the work is like. Probably is higher impact than that. I don't know, Mike, any last thoughts on that?
No, yeah, I mean, I could see though, I mean, just from the perspective of folks talking about coursework feeling like more of a barrier, at least, I mean, if it were more research centric, I mean,
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it'd be a step in the right
it would-
direction for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably give some folks a feeling like, oh yeah, this is benefiting me in the long run because it's helping support my, ability to succeed in research or something like that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this. We are at time. I am going to stop the recording and this will be sent out to folks afterwards. And I'll stay on for a few extra minutes, but Mike and Ben are not obligated to do so.